Okay, everybody, welcome. Again, this is Dee Clarkin. I'm the Executive Director of Indivisible Montgomery, and just letting folks in. We do have quite a large number of people signed up tonight, but of course that we never know, what that will translate out to. Before we get going, I do have a couple of announcements, just a little bit of business. That I'll go ahead and get started with. First of all, I just wanted to do a quick shout out and thank you to all of our members who stepped up so generously to contribute to our quick stand-up fundraiser for Manna Food Center in Gaithersburg. We were just absolutely bowled over by your response to that, and we did raise almost $10,000 for Manna. So we're incredibly grateful. And considering the issue with SNAP benefits at the time, that we weren't sure where we were going with that and just the whole general needs in the county, we were super, super happy to be able to help out Manna in this way, and just very grateful to, I see our guest is here, and
Yes.
very grateful to have your support on that fundraiser. So thank you, thank you, thank you. The other two quick announcements. I do see we have our guest, Delegate Moons, joined us. Um, but two quick announcements. One is we had two actions in the newsletter last Sunday. I just wanted to give a quick shout out. One is the special election in Tennessee on December 7th. Democrat Afton Bain is making a kind of long shot run at the Tennessee 7th district for Congress. So Indivisible is going all out, running phone banks for her. This would be quite a reach, but it's not impossible. And considering how well we did in the November 5th elections, we think it's worth trying. I did hear back from friends at Indivisible Howard County who have been doing the phone banks with Indivisible for Afton Bain, and they said it's a lot of fun, really well run, and quite worth your while. So we had the links in our newsletter on Sunday. And then my last shout out is to remind everybody next week to get yourself organized to take part in this national boycott called We Ain't Buying It. Again, this was all in the newsletter on Sunday. We Ain't Buying It is a national effort being led by Black Voters Matter. It's also supported by National Indivisible, SEIU, 50501, and quite a few other key groups. So again, we're asking our members to very thoughtfully refrain from any purchases from Home Depot, Amazon, or Target during these November 27th, December 1st. So again, that was all in the newsletter. I will stop sharing all this stuff, and I hope that you can take a look at that in your newsletter. And we'll have reminders of that again this weekend, but we really, really hope that everyone will take that quite to heart, and we hope we get a good participation. There's good national press out on it now, and yeah, I think it'll be a good first step into economic boycott work. So I think Delegate Moon is with us. Yes, let me find him so I can.
Yes. Good evening.
Oh, good evening. Thank you so much um for being with us. So we're thrilled to have Delegate Moon with us tonight to talk about a topic that is garnered quite a lot of attention and quite a lot of print and quite a lot of brain space. We're all thinking about it and talking about it, which is redistricting in our state. But before he starts, I just want to share a little bio. Of course, I'm super proud that Delegate Moon is my delegate in District 20 and down close in Silver Spring. But David Moon also serves as Majority Leader in the Maryland House of Delegates. He was first elected in 2014. Moon is a member of the House Judiciary Committee and also chairs the Criminal Law Subcommittee. His past legislative efforts have focused on expanding constitutional rights, promoting criminal justice reform, and defending our diverse communities. Outside of elected office, David works as a grassroots organizer, political consultant, and policy attorney. His projects have included work on immigration reform, transit, criminal justice, fair elections, LGBT rights, civil liberties, youth mobilization, and more. David is Montgomery County native, and he lives in Tacoma Park with his wife, Melinda. So without further ado, Delegate, would you just like to take the floor and take it away?
Sure. Thank you very much. And apologies, I was a few minutes late. I'm still having technical difficulties with Zoom, even after all these years.
Oh my goodness. Well, we hear you loud and clear. And I did mention, why don't we all hold our questions until the end, if that's okay with everybody? And if you want to pop a question into the chat, we will, some of our folks here will keep an eye on that. Okay.
Great. And you know what? Let me just start by cutting to the chase. Um, we are in the final throes of decision making, and we don't yet know what's going to happen. Are we heading into a special session? Are we doing a map? Are we doing it during the regular? Oh, hold on. See, now my desktop just turned on. See, this is what I mean. Technical difficulties. All right, so we don't yet know what's going to happen. So you all tonight are going to help write the end of this story. So if you're tuning in because you are in agreement that Maryland needs to enter the mid-decade redistricting fray, then great. I'm going to drop into the chat right now a link to the sign-up form for the last and final redistricting commission meeting, which is December the 5th at 4 p.m. It appears that there are still slots available for people to sign up and speak their mind. And this is literally the last opportunity you will have to weigh in on whether Maryland should go down this road or not. Um, just for context, it appears to be a first come, first serve sign up process. And when they think they have enough people signed up to fill the allotted time for the meeting, they close signups. On the first meeting, that meant that the Republicans jammed the signups quickly and took most of the slots away, and that was in fact the headline. In the second commission hearing that we just had, the pro mid-decade redistricting side had a slight edge, but it was pretty even. And so again, if you have any inclination that you are for Maryland entering the mid-decade redistricting fray already, I would encourage anyone and everyone who wants to speak their mind to sign up at that link below. Again, once they fill it up, in the past, it's been filled up with GOP operatives and supporters, then that will be it, and the train has left the station. So again, if you're inclined, the link is in the chat, and please spread that to folks that you think might also be interested in signing up to testify. And I see already in the chat, someone has asked whether the Senate president doesn't change his position, what happens? And again, this is why I say we don't know where this story ends at the moment, or if we're headed into a special session or anything like that. But the current state of play, of course, is that the governor appears to want to call a special session. The speaker appears to be ready to go at the soonest opportunity that we can take action, and the Senate president is not in favor of us taking this step. And so I think we are all waiting to see where individual senators are on this question. It hasn't, it's not, I don't think there's, any like official count or anything like that. and most of them are not, publicly posting or in the press saying one thing or another. So I think it remains to be seen where individual state senators are. And that's kind of where we're at. And so it's at this point, it's between now and the final redistricting commission hearing on December 5th, for folks to weigh in, both at the commission and with their General Assembly members, just to indicate where you are. So, having said that, here's some context that I want you to consider, and I'll just say up front, I want to address two um, points of discussion. The second that I'll address is, will this possibly put us in a worse position than we're at today? And I know this is much the focus of the Senate President's letter in opposition to mid-decade redistricting. And I am happy to dive into those legal analyses as point two in this conversation, and as well as answer any questions you could possibly have on that or any other topic. But first, I just want to get back to why I believe we have to do this at all. And believe it or not, it doesn't begin with a partisan analysis whatsoever. It begins with a conversation about state equity. And here is the operative fact that made me snap into action in July, when Texas was even whispering about the possibility of conducting a mid-decade redistricting. It is the year 2025. And when I heard this July, Texas talking about doing a mid-decade redistricting, I had some sudden deja vu. And I kept thinking, like, didn't we already do this? I remember Texas Democrats doing a walkout in the Texas legislature to stop the Republicans in Texas from doing things in that era. The 2003 era was when GOP leader Tom DeLay was pushing these kinds of policies in Texas. And in fact, when I tried to revive my memories by talking to some of my House colleagues about this, they were remembering this too. In 2003, Texas conducted a mid-decade redistricting. So this is not the first time this has happened. And the Texas Democrats, of course, tried to break quorum and all of that. And so literally this exact play has been run before. It was 20 years earlier. And so we absolutely cannot act like this is the first time we've been presented with this scenario and, oh, what should we do? What's the right thing to do? They literally did this already and they got away with it. And what do I mean by they got away with it? Well, in 2003, Texas decided to conduct a mid-decade redistricting after all the states had already done their redistricting updates with the new census, and it was successful. They targeted white Democrats predominantly because they thought the Voting Rights Act would stop them from drawing minority districts out in a mid-decade gerrymander. So what was the outcome? Tom DeLay, with his 2003 mid-decade redistricting, eked out an additional 6 seats for the Republicans that year. Well, those lines were then used in the 2004 congressional midterms. And guess how many seats the Republicans picked up in 2004? 3. In other words, the Texas 2003 mid-decade gerrymander caused them to, in Texas, swing 6 seats, and the GOP only gained 3 seats the very next year. That means if Texas hadn't cheated the system and drew 6 new districts, the Republicans would have lost seats in the next congressional elections. And so the message to policymakers and the public would have been their policies are not popular. They lost seats based on whatever the heck they were doing between 2002 and 2004. But instead, because Tom DeLay succeeded in moving the goalposts and they gerrymandered 6 new seats into existence, it appeared that there was a popular mandate for continued Republican rule. And that is 100% what is going on right now, because they know the Epstein scandal, the tariffs, the healthcare spikes, the snap cuts, all of this stuff is not popular. And they know they did it to keep extending tax breaks for the wealthy. So they tried to sweep most of the impact of their shenanigans to happen after the 2026 elections. And now they still think that's not going to work. And the voters are wise to what they've done. And so now President Trump has asked Texas and all the other states to start again a mid-decade gerrymander um, to find additional votes for the president's agenda in the US House of Representatives. And this time, unlike in 2003 and 2004, whether it's a 6-seat swing or a 3-seat swing, we only are 3 seats short of a majority. So this time, it's actually about not just who appears to have the popular mandate, it's about actual control and the last opportunity to put a check and a balance on President Trump's agenda for his final 2 years in office. So again, if this were the first time this were happening, I could agree with everything in the Senate president's letter about, maybe we need to take the high road. But at this point, if we do nothing as we did in 2003, we are 100% inviting Texas, Missouri, North Carolina, Florida's now in special session for mid-decade redistricting. We are 100% inviting them to do this not only in 2040, 2038, but again in this decade. In fact, Texas Governor Abbott, after he heard that California Governor Newsom plans to counter the Texas 5-vote gerrymander with a California 5-vote gerrymander, Texas Governor Abbott said, oh my God, maybe we need to go back and do a 10-seat special session in Texas. And so the concept that this is just a 2026 problem is crazy. They're telling us right now this is a 2028 tactic, a 2032 tactic, and a 2034 tactic. And so we've got to get with the program. And so it's been much said by many of the people who testified at these commission meetings that their mother told them, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And my very quick retort to that is yes, my mother also told me to stand up to bullies. And when you look at the full context of what's going on, I do believe we are not in a 2 wrongs don't make a right situation. We are in a stand up to the bully situation. And when you look at what's at stake, healthcare, Maryland jobs, it shouldn't be too hard to discern what the next step forward should be. So now I want to turn to, okay, you agree. What they're not playing fair, and we've got to show them that we're willing to fight back so that they don't try this again in whatever 2040. But wait, I'm concerned about what I read in Senate President Ferguson's letter, where he suggested that our current 7-1 Democrat to Republican map might get worse, and we'd end up with a 5-3 or a 4-4, whatever. Number one, let me point you back to my original statement. But who cares what the partisan outcome? I want to start there. All states need to be treated equally on this question. It is preposterous. We are combining 50 state rules to elect a single body, and we don't have basic agreements on the very simple question: how often are we going to draw the lines? Is it once a decade or whenever we want? It's preposterous for Maryland's to be the only ones expected to do it once a decade when multiple other states have decided they're doing it whenever they want. So, as a positive step forward, I also want to assure you this is not where I hope Democrats land as a permanent policy position. So there are 2 other things in addition to dealing with the immediate wildfire encroaching on our state, which I think we need to do, but to put the genie back in the bottle to the extent possible in the post-Trump world. And yes, I do believe that is a thing. We are nearing the midway point of Donald Trump's final term in office. But I am also proposing a 50-state treaty, and I hope Maryland will pass it and send it off to the other 49 states for ratification. And it will simply say that we all us states, starting with Maryland, agree that we are only going to conduct a congressional redistricting once a decade. But this will only take effect after all 50 states agreed, because again, this has to be a national policy of all states equal. And if that also does not move you, because some people think we will never get all 50 states to agree to this, the next thing I will point you to is in Congress today, there is a bill It is sponsored by a Republican, Kevin Kiley of California. And this bill would ban mid-decade redistricting for all 50 states at one time, which is the correct answer. And it would also invalidate any maps that are created this cycle under a mid-decade redistricting. I 100% endorse this plan, and I think anyone who has a problem with what we're doing in Maryland needs to show me the receipts where they said the same thing to Texas and North Carolina when those things were happening, and they didn't just single Maryland out. And I want to see the receipts where they have gone to Mike Johnson, Andy Harris, and the congressional delegation and asked them to support Kevin Kiley's bill. Speaker Johnson and John Thune can make that bill a reality at any point in time. And so the solution to this problem, to the extent any Maryland independent Republican or Democrat has one, lies with Congress or in the 50 states themselves acting together, not in Maryland acting alone. All right, now finally on to the last argument, which is this going to actually harm us? Look, first things first, a very brief primer in Maryland law. What does the state constitution or the Maryland State Code have to say about regulating congressional districts in Maryland? Absolutely nothing is the answer. And that has been the case for eons. If you take yourself back to Governor O'Malley's time in office, for those of you who are old enough to remember that, those maps that were created under the O'Malley era were much maligned by political scientists. You needed a boat to get to some parts to cross between a district in some of those congressional districts from that era. And you had political scientists calling them some of the most gerrymandered maps in America. And they were textbook examples about gerrymandering. They were also legal in Maryland law, and not only were they legal, they were petitioned to referendum, and they were upheld by the voters. So the idea that those maps are not legal, but the much more tame maps and compact and contiguous maps that were created in the years later, those are the illegal maps, is sort of on its face preposterous. And so a lot of people will say, well, we've got judges that were appointed by Larry Hogan currently in the high court. Okay, I grant you this. Judicial activism on the right certainly seems to be the flavor of the day. And in fact, we did have, in the last round of congressional redistricting, we did have a lower court magistrate, not binding law, by the way, because the state Supreme Court did not actually take this up, but a lower court judge did invent whole cloth an interpretation of law that is not written anywhere, literally. And the folks on the right actually like strict textualism, but you will not find the words that they invented anywhere where they are trying to make the state legislative district rules apply to the congressional districts. If that's the game they want to play, I'm sort of all game, because in Maryland we have 3-member state delegate districts, and we could certainly start drawing up 3-member congressional districts if someone actually thinks that's what Maryland law is supposed to do. Okay, so let's say it doesn't matter. Nobody's listening to the old precedents, and we have some judicial activism going on, and they decided to interpret an interpretation of Maryland law to invent congressional redistricting standards that do not actually exist. Well, then the next question becomes, all right, so what's the remedy? And in this scenario, most of the time you say, oh, we didn't like what you did, you invalidate the map, and you kick it back to the original line drawers for a remedy. And that would be the legislature in this instance. The other thing that could happen, as we just saw with Texas, is you revert to the existing map. And that would be the other very clear avenue. And so the next fear that I guess was introduced by the Senate letter is that, okay, but all of those things could happen, and nevertheless you'd have a judge say, I'm not going to send it back to legislature. I'm not going to allow this new map that you've created. Well, then they'd also have to go and invalidate the existing map that we're using, the 7-1 map. The 7-1 map is not a map in question. In fact, Shalega, the Republican Freedom Caucus member who did the lawsuit last time, that lawsuit was settled with the 7-1 map that we're currently using. And Larry Hogan is out there on the record right now saying the 7-1 map is the fair one. And so this is not an argument that anyone appears to be making except the Senate. Uh, and lastly, on that point, if you don't believe me that there's not a shred of text in the Maryland Code or Constitution suggesting that there are standards for congressional redistricting. And again, I'm a good government person. I wish there were standards. I've co-sponsored legislation that had standards. It never passed. I would know. It never made it to the floor, so there are no standards. And guess what? Guess who else agrees that there are no standards? The entirety of the Maryland Republican Party. They had a big press conference last week where they announced they're introducing a bill. What does it do? It creates for the first time standards for congressional redistricting, including rules about when you can redistrict that would ban mid-decade redistricting. Why are the Republicans suggesting that we need to write those into Maryland law? Because they do not currently exist in Maryland law, and they have admitted that very recently through their own legislative efforts and their own press conference. And yet there seems to be one chamber that is the one that still believes there is life to be had in this other argument. So the judges then would have to reject the new map. They'd have to reject returning the map to the legislature for a redraw. They'd then have to go out of their way to reject the existing 7-1 map that no one is currently litigating against. They then again have to decline to return the map to the legislature to redraw instead of the current 7-1. They would then have to come up with what their standard is for when partisan gerrymandering has gone too far. And again, between the O'Malley era and now, I don't know what the hell excuse my language, but I don't know what the heck that standard would be. It's not been really codified or put into court rulings anywhere in an intelligible manner that I can see. And the Supreme Court has actually said that partisan gerrymandering is entirely legal. And then the judge would have to insert a map that they have created instead of all of the aforementioned things. And from Kamala Harris to the DCCC to the DNC to Eric Holder to Chris Van Hollen to Angela Also Brooks to former Attorney General Brian Frosh to Speaker Jones and the House caucus, this is not a chain of events that we believe is a high enough probability to tell us not to do this. And if I am wrong and we lose anyway, and this is forced on us, well, all of that would hinge on interpretation of the state constitution that they invented. And guess what? You can change the state constitution in Maryland with supermajorities of the House and Senate, which we happen to have. So that is also my hopefully clear and understandable argument about why so many zany things would need to happen for the catastrophic scenario that the Senate seems to be leaning on to happen. But don't take my word for it. The whole of the party seems to agree that that's doesn't appear to be a reason to hesitate. And with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Wow, thank you so much. Right, so we have a number of questions in the chat. I'm gonna go see if we can pick them up. Nina says, can Senator Ferguson derail redistricting if he does not change his position?
I would say yes, that is certainly the case. But, believe it or not, the House and Senate, even though the presiding officers have ultimate control, they are fairly democratic bodies, and the presiding officers tend to try and be where their caucus wants to be. And so, if you read some of the most recent press coverage about the state of play, about where this is at and where individual state senators are, it does appear to be a very fluid conversation with quite a good number of the Democratic senators actually saying things like, if it comes to the floor, they're going to vote for it,
Hmm.
and that they're increasingly of a pliable mind as they hear more from their constituents and more from other folks about the different contours about this. And so that's why I say, I think at the end of the day, a lot of this just comes down to where individual state senators and delegates are going to land on the question at the moment. And it's certainly not unprecedented for presiding officers to vote against bills that they've nevertheless allowed onto the floor. Do I think that's where we're at right now? Not quite. But do I think that's out of the question? No.
Okay, and in the another piece of this question is the danger or the problem in changing the boundaries of Maryland 1, if that's, what we're looking at. Wouldn't that make some of the adjacent new districts more competitive? In other words, to sort of dilute by changing the boundaries, we would get more competitive races in some of the adjacent districts, being, i.e., harder for Democrats to win.
Yes, I think that is a very good question. And let me just caveat everything I just said and I'm about to say with a very clear statement here. I have nothing to do with drawing maps,
Mm,
congressional maps. I've not looked at any maps. Nobody's showed me the maps that they're trying to introduce in the House here. And so that is, a task for people smarter than me who care about that sort of thing. I'm again just looking at this purely as a matter of state equity. Now,
right.
if I just put on a different hat for a second and just put on a sort of neutral analyst hat, I mean, look, we had a lot of testimony at the last redistricting commission from independents who said, "Hey, what about me? Um, well, where do I fit into this? If you've got all these partisan districts, and some of them were even talking not just about Democratic districts, but some of them were talking about being packed into a Republican district at the moment. And so, independents of either party feel they've been put into a district that is overwhelmingly of one party or another. Now, the interesting thing, obviously, if you reduce the partisanship in any direction for any party in either of those districts, you are necessarily making the district more competitive and
Mm,
certainly more into the lines of the independents who testified. Now, as to whether you should be worried that that's going to change partisan outcomes, and again, that is certainly not my prime motive or directive here. But I would just point you to look at some of the margins people are winning by in Maryland.
mm,
And I think you'll start to see it's an interesting question. You've got people in Maryland who have won their re-elections for Congress by 1,000 votes, and you've got some who won them by 50% or 70% of the vote, right? So there's a huge amount of votes out there, but just as a general principle, any shift against extreme partisanship in a single district necessarily makes it a more competitive district. And
mm,
there's a heck of a lot of folks in the good government world who see competition as a healthier indicator of democratic participation in governance than uncompetitive districts. So I really think there's an old election principle, Arrow's theorem, for those policies wonks and nerds. But it basically says there's so many dynamics to elections, but when you change one, it tips the scales on another thing,
mhm.
representativeness versus competitiveness, and things like that. They're you can't solve them all at one time. You give up one thing by doing another thing. And again, by making these districts safer, the more safe the district and the more partisan the district, the less competitive it is. And I think there was a lot of testimony that people didn't like that.
Okay, so the next question in the chat, since you said you're not a map guy, you may not be able to, address this one, but this question is, what districts are likely to yield us a possible win? I'm not sure. Suzanne, I assume you mean a sweep of the state by the Democrats? Is that
Well,
Yeah,
I
I
guess
mean,
I'll just
which area?
say it
I
this
mean,
way. There. Oh,
are,
sorry. Go
are
ahead.
are we more in danger of losing than picking up or maintaining?
Again,
it's the
without
same?
having
Yeah.
looked at a particular map, I couldn't answer that
Yeah.
question. But as I noted in my prior response, if you were to just go and look at the most recent election results, you'll see some members of Congress are winning by like huge margins, really big margins. That there's like, lots of strange things would have to happen for them to be unelected, even as we make changes that would make all of their races competitive. We have 8 incumbents, and I think one of them had a close race. The other 7 were not close by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. 6 is the only competitive one. Yeah. Or was. So the next one is going going out national now with our lens for this question. Nina wants to know, have the Republicans redistricted all they are likely to redistrict at this point?
Nope.
Meaning having met with some resistance in Iowa and also in Indiana.
No, I hate to say it, but I think the worst is yet to come.
Really?
The Voting Rights Act, from the 60s is broken into 2 sections. Section 5 and Section 2 were the 2 huge operative parts guiding a lot of constraints on gerrymandering. And they got rid of Section 5 a few years ago, and that was, a way to deal with places that had a history already of
Right.
racism in their
Yeah.
election practices.
Yeah.
And as all of the current cases are winding through the courts, everybody was cheering and thinking, oh, maybe Maryland doesn't have to do anything. The Texas gerrymander was struck down by a federal court. This is true. This is absolutely true. But the Texas decision was based on the last important remaining part of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, which
Mm.
deals with whether you can dilute racial blocks of voters in order to make it so that people of color are less likely to elect their candidate of choice. And that has remained intact, as we see in the Texas decision from the
Mhm.
week, which leaned heavily on the existence of that law. But and so that court said, no, you can't use the new map yet. But they immediately appealed that to the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
and Justice Alito is going to have the deciding say as to whether the Texas whether they do in fact pause the use of the new maps for 2026 while the decision is being made. And so Alito could entirely say, no, I disagree with the district court. We're going to take this matter up in the Supreme Court, but I'm allowing them to continue using the map
Right.
while we decide what's legal and what's not legal. And in fact, many of us are already, and you can just Google it, Google Supreme Court Voting Rights Act, and you'll see articles in Politico, The Hill, and the like, where Louisiana is already changing its election calendar in preparation for the Supreme Court overruling the Voting Rights Act, so that they can immediately go into session to draw any minorities out of office, which right now is illegal for them to do under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
Okay.
And if that is also what the Supreme Court decides, it then goes back and makes legal the map that Texas just attempted, which the court is saying they cannot do because of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And so there are many of us who believe this is what's coming next. And if the Supreme Court does, in fact, gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, then all through the South, you will see the Black Democrats who are in majority Black districts are going to be drawn out of office in one fell swoop. And I think one count I saw on how many of them there are, it was 20 to 22 seats that we expect will be drawn out of existence. And if the
Jesus.
Supreme Court invalidates all of those districts, then they will have to bring all of those legislatures back for mid-decade redistrictings, because you are not allowed to continue using district lines that have been ruled invalid at the High Court. And so nobody should be celebrating right now anything about the Texas redistricting. I really believe the Supreme Court is going to screw us on this. And look, they may not, because if you all the 60s and the lore and American mythology and folk culture in this country, so much of our upbringing and history gravitates around the 60s civil rights movement and what happened with Kennedy King and the like, and the Voting Rights Act. And so is this Supreme Court really prepared to put a new page in the history books that says, except until 2025 or 2026, when the Roberts Court got rid of all this and Black representation in the South became literally a thing for the history books? There's a shred of me that says they have the decency not to do that, but my head is telling me that that is very naive, and I should absolutely not bank on that happening.
Wow. Oh my God. Victor, you've had your hand up. Why don't you go ahead? Victor? We lose him? All right. Let me, okay, so we have another question in the chat. Let's see if Victor comes back. More talking about how we can engage, as voters and participants. Susan wants to know, well, can you give us talking points, and can we encourage people to write in? Susan, I assume you mean in favor of the redistricting. Because, and it is, I was reading the most recent article just the other day. I think it was in Maryland Matters, and they were quoting several members who said, well, I have to wait to hear what my constituents say, and that's true. Susan, is that what you were getting after?
Yes, yes. I mean, I haven't followed up much on this issue, but I know it's something that we have to do. It's in the bigger picture, we cannot lose our democracy, and we can't trust the Supreme Court. So I just want to be sure that I have the correct talking points. And some people don't like to speak publicly. If we could, get letters to
Yeah, sure.
kind of like a template for people to use to send in.
Mm-hmm. We had in the newsletter, it wasn't last week, but I think it was the weekend before, the Maryland Indivisible Coalition had a template for writing letters to members about the redistricting. Did you see that? Because it has pretty good language in there, and you could just use it.
Okay, yeah, that'll be great. Thank you.
Okay. Victor, you're back.
Yeah, thanks. So, David, that we can't always count on the Maryland Senate to do the right thing, right? So supposing that it looks like they're not going to do the right thing, my thought is Kansas. Do you know about this?
Someone testified as to Kansas being a trade state. Was that the thing you're referring to?
Yeah, well, that was me actually.
Okay.
And
Hey,
yeah,
see,
and the
I
thought
was
is
actually
that-
listening to all of the testimony, so I heard your point.
Yeah. So there was an article in the New York Times about a week ago, and about the Kansas process. And the interesting thing is that Kansas is sort of like Maryland but in reverse, in that they have the votes, they have the Republican votes to do it, but there's some reluctance among them, and so they are not moving. And the thought would be
Kansas
that if
Republicans are also a different beast. I should warn some folks, like because it's Kansas. A lot of, like, I remember this from the other Trump era and the Bush era. A lot of the people that were fighting for sort of like Democrat platform values were running as Republicans against the Republicans, and so there were sort of like Democrat Republicans running against Republicans in Kansas, and so I could totally see how they could end up in a scenario where, even though there's plenty of Republicans, there's not enough votes to do a mid-decade, because I think a lot of those
Yeah.
Republicans are probably Republicans of a very unique variety. But
Flavor.
the point is taken, I think, and you know, there's the suggestion that I recall from the testimony was that, you know, we could make an arrangement with other states, and you know, if they were similarly sized and similarly postured, that would be the case. And I think, you know, in some of the what we had heard from the Senate, this was part of their logic actually, and it was Indiana that they were looking at as a state where the Republicans were hesitating in the Senate to do so, as the reason Maryland shouldn't do it.
Right.
I thought the interesting thing about that, and I just, you know, I just want to be a little real about this. Indiana's two-timing us, because after the Tuesday elections, as the pressure was on for leaders of Democratic states to say whether they were going to get on with redistricting, Governor Pritzker in Illinois was asked about this, because Illinois yet hasn't done anything, and he said, Illinois is only going to do it if Indiana does it. And I said, wait a second, Indiana's two-timing us. They have the same deal with Maryland and Illinois. No deal. But it's real smooth of them to box out two states with their promise of not doing it in one state. And I think it's not even clear that it was a deal. I think they just couldn't get their lawmakers to do it. But look, you know, even if Texas fizzles out, even if Indiana fizzles out, I again will point you back to where I started this conversation. If this was the first time we were ending up in a mid-decade battle, I could maybe see where the Senate was coming from. But this is the second time that Texas has tried to screw over its fellow 49 neighbors and states. And so I believe what's going on now is, you know, they early on we said, oh, we shouldn't bring a toothpick to a gunfight, and so that was like, oh, so we got to get into this. And now it's fizzling in Indiana and Utah and Texas, and they're like, wait, you don't need to do this. You don't need to do this. And I'm looking at this like, wait a second. These guys brought guns to a gunfight. They started shooting at us, and they missed. Now that they're out of bullets, they think the war is over and it's ended. And I'm looking at this and thinking, absolutely not. This is when we hit the gas, because when Texas thinks about trying this crap in 2028, 2034, or 2040, they're going to remember how hard Democrats punched back that they do not try this crap again. That is honestly where I land on that.
David, there's another question in the chat, and based on some of the things you've been saying, and you know, that and all of us who have been reading along about the president's arguments and stuff, what do you think the real reason is for Ferguson to oppose this?
I don't know. You know, I want to take it at face value that he doesn't think this is the right thing to do. I mean, I agree with him. Totally agree with him. You know, I want to be clear. I take no joy out of conducting a mid-decade redistricting. I think this is a really awful place that we've been put in. And I think it's preposterous, because if you look at what it means, if we really actually take this to its logical outcome, it means the politicians are going to be choosing their voters in front of every single election. That there's no way to hold them accountable if they can dodge accountability by changing the lines. I mean, again, that was the lesson that Texas showed us in 2003 and 4, when they did this. They managed to have the U.S. House avoid the accountability of the voters just by changing the lines, and that is not where we want things to go. So I do want to just have a closing thought on this in the vein that we're all Democrats, and people of reasonable minds can come to different conclusions on this. And I do think the Senate president's position is an honorable one. I just happen to be in a different fight mode, again, based on the fact that I'm thinking back on this battle all the way back to over 20 years ago,
Right.
when Texas did this exact same play, and that's guiding me. But certainly other people are going to have different points of reference to guide them. And so all I can say is I hope we come to the right decision. And again, we have only between now and the final redistricting commission on December 5th at 4 p.m. And I do believe the way this is staged, the question before them is whether to engage in a mid-decade redistricting or not. If the answer is yes, then I imagine we'll see some sort of map come at some point. And after that, the next question is, does this conversation take place in a special session or during the regular legislative session? But as everybody knows, this is all ending up in court. And because the filing deadline for Congress is this February, we would like the courts to have this case as soon as possible.
ASAP. Yeah. Yep. All right. Do we have time for just one more, David?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. Sorry, guys, we're getting to the end of our time here. Suzanne wants to know, what do you anticipate will be the results of Governor Moore's impartial redistricting commission? Yeah, I'd like to get your read on that as well.
I honestly don't know, but you're right to put impartial in quotes. If you take a look at the lineup, it's obviously sort of senior figures from Maryland government who have gravitas and what have you.
Right.
And I think the important thing to realize here is the legal grounding for everything that's going on is, as I said, I mean, in some ways, I'll phrase it this way. There's no standards for congressional redistricting in
Right.
Maryland. And so the process is whatever the governor says it is. And that's true. At some points in time, we had a legislative redistricting commission, and other points in time, we had a governor's redistricting commission, and that changed if it was Hogan or O'Malley in office. And now that we have Wes Moore, it's the governor's redistricting commission again, and the composition and the hearing format is totally different than the other ones. And so it's just one reminder that the redistricting standards in Maryland are whatever the powers that be say they are. And so the results will be what they think is the correct thing to do. And I think a lot of it is guided by some of the considerations that we've talked about tonight. And so I really do think they're thinking about this in much the same way most of us are thinking about this and wondering the same things. And so it is really true that the remaining feedback that both they and the individual members of the assembly receive is actually meaningful. I don't know how the story ends, and you are going to help write it.
Right. And so that leads to our final thing, is that you're right. I mean, if everyone here, if you have an opinion, you want to voice your opinion, we need to reach out to all our members as we have been doing, and we need to see about the December 5th, right? December 5th final meeting of the commission. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Delegate. I really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you about this. It's been very illuminating. Thank
All
you.
right. And thank you. You guys are the real champions hanging out at 8 p.m. on a weeknight.
We are very, very tough group here. Okay, good night, everybody. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.